Imagine that tomorrow morning, you wake up and discover that your hometown is no longer in the country where you were born. The streets are the same, the houses are the same, the people are the same, but a line drawn on a map has changed everything. This is the story of the Partition of India in 1947, a story of freedom, hope, politics, migration, tragedy, and survival. It is one of the most important and emotional chapters in the history of South Asia. To understand why India was divided, we must travel back nearly 200 years. In the 19th century, much of the Indian subcontinent came under British rule. After the revolt of 1857, the British Crown took direct control of India. Over the following decades, railways were built, industries expanded, and cities grew. But many Indians were unhappy with foreign rule and demanded freedom. By the early 20th century, the desire for independence had become stronger than ever. Leaders from different communities began organizing political movements. The Indian National Congress demanded greater self-rule and eventually complete independence. At the same time, many Muslim leaders worried about how their community would be represented in a future independent India. As political debates intensified, tensions between communities also increased. The situation became more complicated because British India was incredibly diverse. It was home to hundreds of languages, cultures, and religions. Hindus formed the majority population, while Muslims made up a significant minority. Sikhs, Christians, Buddhists, Jains, and many others also lived across the region. For centuries, people of different faiths had lived together in towns and villages throughout the subcontinent. However, politics was changing rapidly. One of the most influential Muslim leaders was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He believed that Muslims needed strong political safeguards and feared that their interests might be overlooked in a democratic system dominated by the Hindu majority. In 1940, the Muslim League adopted the Lahore Resolution. This proposal eventually evolved into the demand for a separate Muslim homeland. Not everyone agreed with this idea. Many leaders, including Mahatma Gandhi, hoped that India could remain united after independence. Gandhi believed that people of different religions could live together peacefully in a single nation. But as the years passed, finding a compromise became increasingly difficult. Then came World War II. The war changed the world, and it changed Britain's position in India. Britain emerged victorious, but the country was exhausted. The war had drained its economy and weakened its ability to maintain a vast empire. Across India, the demand for independence became impossible to ignore. By 1947, the British government had decided to leave India. The question was no longer whether India would become independent. The question was, what would happen when the British left? To oversee the transfer of power, Britain appointed Lord Louis Mountbatten as the last Viceroy of India. Mountbatten arrived with an enormous responsibility. He had to manage the end of British rule and determine how power would be transferred. The decision was made to divide British India into two independent nations, India and Pakistan. The announcement shocked millions. People knew independence was coming, but few expected the division to happen so quickly. The new borders needed to be drawn almost immediately. For this task, the British selected Sir Cyril Radcliffe. There was one surprising detail. Radcliffe had never visited India before. He was given only a few weeks to divide one of the world's largest and most complex regions. Using maps, population statistics, and administrative records, he attempted to draw a border that would separate Muslim majority and Hindu majority areas. It was an almost impossible task. Villages, farms, rivers, railway lines, and even neighborhoods were split apart. Millions of people waited anxiously to learn which side of the border they would end up on. Then came August 1947. On August 14th, Pakistan became an independent nation. A day later, on August 15th, India celebrated its independence. After nearly 2 centuries of British rule, freedom had finally arrived. Crowds gathered in cities. Flags were raised. People celebrated in the streets. For many, it was the happiest day of their lives. But behind the celebrations, a crisis was already unfolding. As the details of the new border became known, millions of people feared they would become minorities in a new countries. Families faced impossible decisions. Should they stay where they had lived for generations? Or should they leave everything behind and move to the other side of the border? Many chose to leave. What followed became one of the largest migrations in human history. Entire families packed their belongings onto carts. Some traveled by train, others traveled on foot. Many carried only what they could hold in their hands. People left behind homes, farms, businesses, schools, and memories. Some believed they would return after a few weeks. Many never saw their homes again. The roads were crowded with endless columns of refugees stretching for miles. Children cried from exhaustion. Parents worried about food and water. Elderly people struggled to continue the journey. No one knew what the future would bring. As fear spread, violence erupted in many regions. Communities that had lived side by side for generations were suddenly caught in a storm of suspicion and anger. Riots broke out. Villages were attacked. Thousands of innocent people lost their lives. The violence became one of the darkest chapters of the partition. Yet amid the tragedy, there were also remarkable stories of courage. Many people risked their own lives to save neighbors from different communities. Families hid strangers in their homes. Friends protected one another despite the dangers around them. These acts of humanity remind us that compassion can serve. At railway stations, emotional scenes unfolded every day. Parents searched for missing children. Brothers looked for sisters. Friends said goodbye, uncertain if they would ever meet again. Historians estimate that around 14 to 15 million people crossed the new borders during partition. Never before had so many people moved in such a short period of time. The scale was unprecedented. The consequences of partition extended far beyond 1947. Millions of refugees had to rebuild their lives from nothing. New homes had to be found. New jobs had to be created. Entire communities had to start over. The political landscape of South Asia was transformed forever. India and Pakistan began their journeys as independent nations. Both countries faced enormous challenges in the years that followed. The memories of partition remained alive in the minds of those who experienced it. Parents told their children about villages they once called home. Grandparents shared stories of neighbors they never saw again. Photographs, letters, and family heirlooms became precious reminders of a lost world. Even today, nearly 80 years later, the Partition of India remains one of the most discussed events in South Asian history. For some, it represents the birth of new nations. For others, it is remembered as a time of immense suffering and separation. But above all, it is a story about people. Ordinary people. People who dreamed of freedom. People who faced uncertainty. People who lost homes but refused to lose hope. The Partition of India was more than a political decision. It was a moment that changed millions of lives forever. And its legacy continues to shape the history of South Asia to this day. When we remember partition, we remember not just borders and politics, but the human stories behind them. Stories of courage, stories of loss, stories of survival, and stories that should never be forgotten.